Alright, it do be your boy Chili. Welcome back to Pantrio. We're gonna knock out some progress today. Let me tell you. So, last video we got the database all kind of set up for our first little wrangle, and after that I did a little bit of messing around about how I want to organize things on the client side with the Vuex, with the store. And long story short, I learned some things. I hit some walls and I busted through them. If you're super interested in all the little tests I did, they're in this branch here. I pushed it. So it's experiment/Vuex mod deck 1. And you can check that out if you like, but I'm not gonna waste time video doing that again. So we're gonna start off where we left in the last video. And I'm going to use the information that I gained in my experiments to facilitate. So, first things first, I don't like the whole setup that we have here. I mentioned, so this is how our API is going to get the information about the storage areas and the items in those areas. And it's nested data structure, an array, and each of the items in the array has another array. But here's the thing. I want to be able to go from items to areas and from areas to items. I want to go both directions. I can do that with the database. I want to do that on the client side. And with the structure, I can go from areas to items, but I can't go from items to areas, and that's no good. So things are going to be super simple in this API output. Let me show you how simple it's going to be. Return. We're going to return an associative array and 3 things in that array. Areas, which is going to be area, storage area. Got it wrong. Storage area all. So put all the storage areas under areas. Put all the items, you guessed it, items, and put all the item. How should I do this? I guess instances. Camel case. JavaScript is camel case. It's all about that camel case life. Item, instance, all. And there you have it. Here is our retrieve function. Becomes much simpler. We're just going to return 3 separated arrays. And what we're going to do is to get the ability to jump from one to the other in both directions, we're going to wire up relationships, references on the client side using the IDs and the keys that come with these data structures. So when you do this, Laravel is going to convert all of these. It'll give you a collection of models. It will convert that collection of models basically, eventually into JSON. Everything gets into JSON, automatic for you. Don't have to worry about it. That's why it's one of the reasons why we love the Lara. So that's the server side. Now the client side, here's where things are going to get a little interesting. First of all, the store jank.ts, it's got to go, right? We don't need this anymore. But let's just rename it, and I'm going to name it areas. And this is kind of complicated because it's going to actually store areas and the items, and the areas and items are going to be linked by item instances. So it's a little weird, but bear with me, we got to start somewhere. Now I'm also going to change the name here, areas for the module namespace, and name the class area module. We don't need, obviously, this stuff is not too pertinent. Now here's the thing. So what kind of state are we going to store in this bad boy? Well, we're going to store areas, and it is going to be of type area. Now we don't actually have area. So what should we do about this? Well, in Nuxt, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm going to call it core. Here's where I'm going to store my data logic, sort of like the models, but also other things like just classes and TypeScript that I write. That doesn't really have anything to do with a specific aspect of Nuxt. So in here, let's create a new TypeScript file. And we're gonna call it, let's call it entities. I could separate each thing into its own file, and I probably should, but I don't want to right now because I don't feel like it. That's basically where we're at right now. So first thing I'm gonna define in here is I'm gonna define a type that represents the data that is gonna be coming in from the API, from the server side. So we're gonna call it interface item transfer. So here is a basically a data transfer object, if you want to call it that, and has two things that we're interested in: the ID of the item and the name of the item. So this interface thing in TypeScript lets us define the shape of an object. We can use that for type checking, and then we're going to export class item. So here's how we're going to represent items inside of our system. All right, so how do we do this? Well, item is going to have three data members. It's going to have obviously the ID of the item and the name, but it's also going to have an array that points to the instances of that item. So first let's do public instances is equal to an array of item instance, which does not exist yet, but which will exist in the future. We're just going to initialize that to an empty array for the beginning. Now, for the other two members of the class, we can do something cool, because usually, you know, in other languages, you define what items are in the class, and then in the constructor, you take those items in, and then in the body of the constructor, you assign those to the members of the class. You can do this without all that boilerplate in TypeScript because it's sexy. So we say public ID number, public name string. And that's how we define our constructor. I think we have to call it constructor. Yeah, like this. And what this does is it does three things automatically. It says, okay, this class contains the member ID and the member name. They're both public. Here's their types. It says the constructor takes those parameters in, and the constructor will automatically assign those parameters to the members of the class. And that's it. We don't have to write a bunch of boilerplate code that is annoying and that makes refactoring more annoying. It's a very good feature of the language. Okay. Now I'm going to make a static function that will allow me to hydrate my item from my item transfer data transfer thing. So static hydrate. So we'll call it xf is type item transfer. Why are you not do it? And it's going to return a type of item. And all it's going to do is return a new item with xf.id and xf.name. There we go. And what else are we going to do? Well, let's keep it simple for right now. We'll just keep it at this. Now we're going to have to do the same deal for areas, and it's going to be pretty much identical. So here you have it. Area has, you know, an ID and a name. Beautiful. It also, every area has pointers to item instances, right? The instances of what items are in that area. Just like an item has item instances of this type of area, of this type of item, would be whatever area it may be in. And these are all instances of different items in this specific area. You get the idea? All right. Now, the final thing that we need is the actual item instance. So let's do export interface. We're going to make the transfer object first. Item instance transfer. All right. So obviously we're going to have an ID because everything in Laravel has an ID, but we're also going to have the item ID. So what item is this an instance of? And we're going to have a storage ID. Storage area ID. Note that these names here, they have to match what is going to be coming out of here, which means they have to match the names that we specified in the migration for the database. Yeah, and finally, what is the final thing? Right. There's also a quantity, right? Every instance of an item in a storage area has a quantity. How many of that item are in there? So quantity, and that's a number. So here's the parts of the model coming out of the API that we're going to be interested in. And then we're going to create, again, item instance. So let's make our constructor that's going to define also what members are in this bad boy. So obviously public, right? ID number, public, quantity, which is a number, public, area. This is the reference to the area that this item instance exists in, and that is going to be type area, and public item, and as type item. And here, create the body of the constructor. Now here's where things get a little bit different. This one also has a hydrate function, but it can't get all of its data from the item instance transfer, because it also needs to know what pre-existing area in our system and what item are these going to point to. And it can't get that information itself. It has to get that information from outside in the store. So it's got to be passed in. So area is area, and the item is an item. This is obviously going to return an item instance. So how is this going to look? Well, I mean, that's pretty simple. That's just the same as we normally do. Return new item instance like this. Now, here is where the magic happens. So we've got items that point to instances, and we've got areas that point to instances. And instances also point back to those things. So we have this bidirectional relationship, and those are kind of annoying to maintain, but after all, different things that I've thought out, this is probably going to be the best solution out of all of them for us. So we need to wire up those references. I mean, the reference from the item instance to the area and the item, those are wired up in the constructor. But we also, when we make an item instance point to an area, we have to make that area point back to the item instance. So what we're going to do is for each of these, for the item and the area, we're going to add functions to add an instance and remove an instance. So let's like this, add instance. And instance is going to be an item instance. Not going to return anything. So this dot instances dot push. Now this is very important. When you add things and you remove them from an array, you've got to use push and you got to use splice. If you change something, you have to push and splice. You can't directly assign to an array because Vue won't pick it up. So that's not a big problem here. Push is what we would want to use anyways in this case. So add an instance, we just push that into the array of instances. Remove instance is a little trickier. So we get an instance item instance. And so first we have to find out the index of that instance in our array. So we go constant index is equal to this dot instances dot find index, and we're going to do I for the index, and if I doesn't stand for the index, it stands for the instance. So let's do inst, and if inst is equal to the instance that we passed in, then it's going to return that index. So it loops through all the instances here, it uses this to compare them to the one we passed in to see if it's the same. If we get the one that we're looking for, then we're going to do this dot instances dot splice at index remove one item. There you go. Okay, so now this is just, we're going to copy and paste this into here. As far as I know, TypeScript does not have traits or mix-ins, at least not directly. So this is probably the best that we can do. I wouldn't want to force an inheritance relationship between these two because I don't believe that one logically exists. And now with this stuff in here, we're going to put in the logic to connect entities. So we go private, connect entities, and we do this, dot area, dot add instance. So when we want to connect ourselves to the entities that it's supposed to be connected to, we call add instance on both of those entities. And there you go. Then what we do is in the constructor, after we built this bad boy up, we're going to do this dot connect entities. There you go. So constructor sets up all these four members, and then it puts in the backlinks basically. And now we have bidirectional going from item to item instance to area. So we can go from item to area, and we can go from area to item. And that is going to be very useful. All right, so this is the basic logical data of our thing. Now let's import. We have lots of things to import. We're going to import all of these things from ... We go up one, we go into core, we go into entities.ts, and there you have it. Guess we don't need the semicolon at the end. I always waffle when it comes to putting semicolons in this thing. I love my semicolons in, normal statements, but for these ones, I'm like, do I need it? Do I not? I don't know. I don't care. At the end of the day, I don't care, but I want to make these match here. Okay, so now, lovely. We have our data types, area. Areas is going to be an array of area. Why are you mad at me? Property area has no initializer. That's fair. That is a fair point. There you go. So we're going to store areas and we're going to store our items. That is our state data. And the instances will just be basically stored, in between these as references. So we don't need to put them directly into the store here. All right. So what kinds of operations here do we need? Vuex stuff. Well, mutation. Let's have a mutation to replace the array of areas with a new array. So we're going to call this one replace areas. And I'm going to put my mutations, I'm going to prefix them with an underscore. And you'll see why in a second. So areas is an array of area. And what is your problem now? Why are you... Oh, wait. That's the wrong direction. There we go. That's better. Okay. And we're just going to do this dot areas is equal to areas. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. And let's do the same for items. All right. Now here's where things get very interesting. We want an action. Wait, action has to be capitalized. Action. And what this action is going to do is it is going to initialize the store. So we take in no parameters, and we're going to do some stuff. We're going to contact the backend, get all the data, and then fill it into our store. Now, one of the beauties of the Vuex store is that if we navigate between different pages in our application, we can maintain the same data, the same central data that is shared between all those different pages, all those different components. But every time no matter what component we enter, we have to initialize the store because we don't know which one we're going to be entering first. But we don't want to initialize it if it's already been initialized. So let's put in here is initialized, and that's a bool. We'll set that initially equal to false. Maybe it's boolean. Yeah, that's what it's called. All right. So what we're going to do is if this is initialized. So we only run this code if we're not initialized. Now let's do const data is equal to, you know what? It's like an interface. We'll call it API data. Well, maybe I'll come up with a better name later on, but for now, this is what we're going to call it. And we're going to say it has three things, right? It has areas, which is an array of area transfer. It has items, which is an array of item transfer. And it has item, or it has instances, which is an array of item instance transfer. Data is equal to, data is a type API data, and is equal to, I'm going to await axios.get, what is our thing again? HTTP Panterio. Eventually I'm going to code this part here, I'm going to code that into the plugin itself. Not the plugin, but what is it called? The Nuxt config. So you don't have to put it into every single call here. But for now, yeah, it's fine. Here he is. Axios is the name of the thing, and there you go. So here we should have our API data. It'll be properly typed for us. So that's nice. We'll get our IntelliSense on that. Now, let's load, first of all, const areas. We'll create a little temporary variable here. And data.areas. Now here's the thing. We don't want to just assign those. Those are data transfer objects. We want to create a area class object from each data transfer object. By hydrating them. So we basically want to map from transfer objects to class objects. How do we do that? Map. And this is so beautiful, you're going to love it. So we have an area transfer object. And for each one of those, we're going to do area.hydrate, and we're going to pass in the area transfer object. And there you go. And we do the same for items. And how clean is that? It's quite beautiful. I love it. I love this arrow. We need this in C++. It's just the normal, the lambdas, they ain't sexy. I understand they allow you to do a lot more specification. They're tighter. But in situations when you don't need that tightness, I'd love to have the shorthand. I'm not going to lie. Anyways, all right. So, data.instances. We set up the areas, we set up the items. Now we have to generate the instances. How do we do that? Well, for each instance in the data transfer stuff, we're going to do instance transfer. We're going to map that to this function here. So what are we going to do for each one of those? Well, we've got to get the area. So const area. We got to get the area that instance is referencing. How do we do that? Well, we go areas dot find, going through each area and checking to see if the ID of that area is equal to instance dot storage area ID. So the foreign key matches the ID of that area, then that is the area that we're looking for. We get a reference to the object itself. Do the same for items. And now we have the area, we have the item. What's left? Well, first off, if we didn't find the area, or we didn't find the item, that's a problem, right? So let's just throw we'll do something like bad index in item instance number, and you gotta love the string interpolation. You know, I shit on JavaScript regularly. I'm a regular shitter on JavaScript, but this is some of the best interpolation you're gonna see. I'm just saying. You love it. Okay, so we make sure that we're not in any kind of dumb bad state. Otherwise, we do item instance dot hydrate. We're gonna hydrate based on the transfer object plus the area and the item that it links to. And you might be saying, well, you're not using the return value. We don't need to, because hydrate is going to create an item instance, which is going to create backlinks from items and areas to this object. So the object will not be dangling. It will not be, leaked. Will not be garbage collected. It'll be fine. Final thing, don't forget, we've now initialized this bad boy. So this .isInitialized should be set to true. And there we go. We have our initialization function. It links up all the data. And Bob, as they say, is your uncle. Whether it works or not, that remains to be seen. But we've got the bare bones set up here. All right.